we're really excited for this conversation where we're exploring some of the different possibilities with virtual production. You know, we titled it A New Type of Creator because we really believe that virtual production allows not only for revolutionary and new forms of content as it relates to traditional production, but also new forms of content in general. You know, new platforms for people and creatives who may not have previously had access to, you know, the types of stories and resources that virtual production allows for. And so I'm really excited to have a conversation with our panelists today. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself and our panelists. So my name is Daniel Malik. I'm the Director of Content and Innovation at Vue. At Vue, we own and operate several studios across North America, and we have the Vue Network, which is a collection of 22 virtual production stages across the world. So, but before we get started, I'd love everyone to go through and introduce themselves as well, starting with you, Niall.
Thanks. My name is Niall Hendry. I am Head of Partnerships at Move AI. At Move AI, we create markerless motion capture. So we remove the need for suits, and we use AI to power that motion capture data. We're actually here with Disguise on booth C6118. So if you want to see a real-time markerless mocap demo, head up there anytime, and you can see it and check it out for yourselves.
My name is Corey Crumpacker. I am a director and a producer based in Austin, Texas. I've been freelance directing for the last couple years, more in the short-form commercial space. But the last year or two, I've been really focusing on virtual production and gotten a couple projects off the ground, specifically in the commercial side.
Hi, my name is Igor Golyak. I'm artistic director of Arlequin Players Theater and Zero Gravity Laboratory. I'm a theater director, and with the pandemic, we needed to continue paying for our theater space, so we converted it to a virtual production studio, to a green screen studio, and got a bunch of critics pick, New York Times critics picks, and have now expanded from a 100-seat theater to thousands of people around the world.
Hi, I'm Connor McGill with Pixera. I lead the U.S. team, including all of our engagement with the virtual production community. And Pixera is media server, software, and hardware that kind of sits at the heart of these systems, and is where all the video and audio and tracking data kind of gets routed.
Great. So to start off the conversation, I'd love to just hear all of your perspectives to this question of what is virtual production. I think you all likely have a slightly different answer. So let's start with you, Connor. We'll work our way back this way, but just would love to hear from all of your perspectives, what is virtual production? How do you define it?
Well, I'm going to try to bring a more technical perspective, so I'll give a technical answer, which is I think it's just the virtualization of processes and methods that used to be physical, chemical, mechanical. They're now being done with bits and bytes over the network in real-time 3D rendered graphic engines. So I think virtual production is just the kind of the virtualization of some of these processes that were primarily mechanical or chemical in the past.
From an opposite side, as a creator, in theater, there's such a thing called site-specific theater, where performances or live events take place at a, at a train station, or at at the airport and so forth. Not specifically at a theater venue. So for me as a creator, the virtual space is just a venue, a playground to create in. It's a site-specific venue, and like every venue, it has its positives and its negatives, and it's a beautiful playground that I, as a creator, love creating in.
I would say from the director side, a lot of your work as a filmmaker is you're reacting. It's this relationship and collaboration with the environment, especially every location, you have a different relationship with it. You're working with different constraints. And with virtual production, you get all this control. So you get to control the world in a much more potent way than you necessarily would in other scenarios. So I would say you can control the world instead of it controlling you as a filmmaker.
And I think what's interesting is, from a vendor perspective, the talk of this hall in particular for the show has been, what is virtual production, how does it work? And I think like coming from like my background broadcast and looking at what Connor said in terms of the technologies now adapting, changing, and developing, virtual production in terms of like a lot of the technologies have been in place for actually quite a long time, but what we're seeing now is actually the coalescing of those technologies in workflows that are both real time, that are high quality, which are the two facets of what you need, that are now accessible almost at scale, comparative to what was before, as you said, like a very mechanical workflow. Now you are getting data streams that are all being very, very low latency, very high quality. And in terms of that virtual production workflow, I think what we're seeing now is actually probably the advent of virtual production of what it's going to be in the next 10 years, as to the last 10 years has been really building up to this point. But I think we're at an inflection point in the market now where what we will see in the future is the progression of these technologies. And I think that's what's really exciting about what's next for virtual production actually, rather than what it is just today.
Very cool. Yeah, and it's really about taking it out of the context of it's not just a volume, it's not just an LED wall, it's virtual production actually applies to every step of the the pipeline when it comes to production, and different types of content as well, like Igor is going to talk a little bit about. So with that, actually, Igor, I'd love to have you talk a little bit more and go in depth about what you've done, and maybe we could cue up that video that demonstrates a little bit of the work you're doing. And could you set the stage for us?
Yeah. So we've been doing the virtual productions since the start of the pandemic, and what's really interesting to me, these productions happen live, and we stream them out to the audience. But we are not just streaming them as a second best solution to a live engagement, in-person engagement. We're trying to find rules and ways to make that not a second best to a live happening, but its own thing, its own art form, its own genre. So we have actors in the studio that are in a 3D environment created by Ximmetry and Unreal Engine on a green screen that interact with the audience, right? That the audience get to ask questions, they get to vote, they get to participate. So it's not a one-way stream with content created on the screen and audience members eating popcorn in their house, but we actually try to pull them into the show where they have a role to play. Something depends on them. So it's a different way of taking in content. It's a different way of participating, and not as something that's second best to a live performance, but it's its own thing. It's a way to communicate with the audience that's instantaneous and get their feedback and feel like they have some agency to play in what's happening as a collective, because they're all watching it at the same time, and a lot of the times they can see each other. So we're pulling their camera feeds into the show, and for example, there's a toast, and everyone toasts together. And there's a different thing where I'm watching a production, and I have Connor here and Dan, and we're the three of us, and I can see that it's Connor. It's not somebody. It's not somebody else. And with Connor, maybe I'll behave differently. It's a thing that happens in a community, and that's really important. And that's what we're trying to pull out. So it's not just a cool way to provide bits and zeros and ones, but it's a way to engage the audience that hasn't existed before.
All right, are we ready with that video?
The sound. So this should have sound. So this production, we collaborated with the Holocaust Museum. It's about the ship that traveled in 1939 from Hamburg on its way to Cuba with 937 Jews on board, some of them coming from concentration camps, and basically the audience were some of these, they were in their own cabins, sort of, and they were voting on talent shows and that were happening actually as it's a documentary material that were happening on this virtual boat. So these virtually displaced people on this boat, and when they traveled to Cuba, some of you know that Cuba didn't accept them, then America didn't accept them, Canada didn't accept them. They ended up going back to Hamburg, and a lot of them died in the Holocaust. And you know, with some of these materials, when the audience were voting on stuff, and they were voting on U.S. visas, and like on these talent shows, and people are escaping death, and they're performing in these weird talent shows that talk about their experience of escaping death, and then it turns into something else. And then during the show, the audience members, we can see them because we're pulling in their cameras. And you know, when you see 80-year-old ladies, you know, stand up because there is a moment when they're asked to stand up to commemorate the Holocaust victims, and they stand up, and you can see them crying in a virtual show. It's not even, you know, it's not even real. Well, it is real, but who the heck knows? I mean, I can see you now, I can see that you're real, but on Zoom, like, how real is real, right? And they stand up. So something that pulls them, that changes them, that's not a way that a lot of times film is watched. And it's some sort of a merge between film, video games, when you're participating and influencing, and theater that changes, that it makes a huge emotional impact.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Apologies that we didn't have the sound, but the visuals really capture what you're achieving there. It's
and it's all rendered live.
Wow.
It's all rendered live, and yeah,
wow.
the actors are live, yeah.
And so really the same virtual production technology that we're seeing around here is being applied in a completely new way, you know, something that isn't seen as much. And so it's very exciting. You know, I'm curious to hear more on the technology side. So Connor, I'll start with you here, but what are some of the exciting innovations and things that you're working on at Pixera over the last year that apply not only to what Igor is talking about, but virtual production in general? What are you excited about right now?
Sure. Well, certainly we've seen a real rise in the large virtual production LED volume, and supporting workflows at that scale has required lots of innovation in handling large amounts of video data, being able to utilize really robust networking to be able to improve speeds at which you can get content on the wall or iterate content, being able to improve the human interface with the system so that the creative choices are kind of consolidated in a way that still gives you creative freedom, but it doesn't like swamp you in technical choices. So I'd say, you know, on the engine side, we talk about our render engine being the kind of the engine of the car. That's required a lot of innovation to be able to handle massive real-time scenes or really, really large plates. And then on the interface side, we've had to make it just a much clearer set of steps to get the desired outcome in the volume. And of course, you're dealing with so many interreliant pieces of technology. Tracking systems, which can be influenced by light and other forms of interference. LED tiles, which of course, have their own the whole universe of service and support that they need. Then the cameras, of course. I mean, geez, the amount of physics and science that goes into just the camera sensor is insane. And then, of course, there's the lights, and then you've got the actual virtual content. So there's so many aspects to this that need to be kind of wrangled. And what we're trying to do at Pixera is make that just as easy as putting together something in iMovie, which is harder than it sounds.
No, I know the back end is a lot of work, but it was actually awesome. Last night, we had an event at our studio. Pixera was a part of it, and we were making some changes to the timeline, the content we wanted on the screen, and our operator was doing something else. But I saw the way he was working at Pixera, and so I knew what I wanted, so I walked over. I made a few little tweaks. It was actually a super familiar workflow to me, coming from like Premiere, After Effects. I was like, oh, okay, I know how this works.
Love it.
Awesome. And I'll ask the same question to you, Niall. Obviously, Move AI, you have real-time markerless motion capture now. Tell us a little bit about what that journey has been like over the past year and what you're excited about looking ahead.
Yeah. Firstly, the visuals last night looked amazing as well. So like, hats off to everyone for doing that. It was brilliant.
Nice.
In terms of markerless motion capture, I mean, to give a bit of context as well, we came to the mocap world with a view that you shouldn't have to wear suits, you shouldn't have to don markers, you shouldn't have to go through the difficulty of setup and to be honest, the high degree of cost that motion capture traditionally entails. So we set about it in a completely different way. We use artificial intelligence to understand what a human body is in video. We do that from multiple angles, and then we've patented a way to do that to a really, really high degree of quality that's getting essentially Vicon level quality of data, but using only RGB cameras. What we did find, though, is our original foray into doing motion capture was in the cloud. Now, as we all know, especially here, real time is everything to a lot of people, and we really worked in lockstep with Epic Games and NVIDIA initially to manage our neural networks in a completely different way. Like, when you say a convolutional neural network, the reason it's called convolutional is because it's huge. So trying to train artificial intelligence training data on what a human body is through thousands of scenarios is actually quite complex. So what we had to do is dial back the complexity of processing. We worked really hard with NVIDIA to get that to run on a local GPU. What we've then built now is a system that uses between 4 and 8 cameras to track today 2 people in about a 10 by 10 meters, about 30 feet volume, in under 200 millisecond delay, real-time throughput into both Disguise, which as you can see down the corridor down there, and also into Unreal Engine. We are basically taking that entire workflow and running real-time artificial intelligence, so like a practical use of AI rather than a scary use of AI is always quite nice, to then create more content, right? So you've got things like shadows, you have things like digital puppeteering, to the extent where now you can interact with the scene to be able to trigger graphics, trigger effects, all based on human movement. As we were saying before around the content creation side of things, now this is extremely grandiose, but we have a saying at Move, is like, this is an Albert Einstein quote, but nothing happens until something moves. And fundamentally, human movement through pretty much all content creation is essential to making it relatable, to understandable. To your point around people being able to interact and understand it, so where we really feel that we bring benefit is with that human movement that can power all sorts of content, that this content that you both are creating.
Very cool. Corey, I'd love to get your perspective on this next question. So, obviously, you've recently done a few productions using virtual production technology. I'd love to get your perspective, as someone who is doing a lot of commercial work, a lot of short-form content. Do you think that there are advantages to filmmakers like yourself that virtual production allows for, that potentially the traditional system, traditional production may have, provided more hurdles?
Yeah, I think to the point earlier of being able to control the world, that's the immediate short-term version of why this makes our life in the short-form content so much better. But I think especially where this is going, we're still in such of the early phases of this that we're kind of in the shiny ball version of where it's like this is still the sexiest new technology, and everything here is, we're in this phase where everything's consolidating and getting easier and easier to use for, I have a technology background, so I'm able to wrap my mind around a lot of this stuff, but a lot of the creators and the cinematographers and directors and production designers, they're going to have to be able to wrap their mind around this, and I'm excited, the way all these tools are coming together, that are going to make this more accessible to the creative, like Move AI. It's taking a lot of the technical out of motion capture.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, motion capture, animation is difficult, right? Like, doing human animation is hard. Like, what we want to do is enable creators like yourselves to be able to remove that step and just go, I want to throw, like, in non-real time, you can use iPhones, right? So everyone who has an iPhone has an old iPhone. Like, we found that out just from a survey we did of, like, 20,000 people. And, like, you can then go and say, actually, I can animate things quickly, I can ideate, I can create content, and it doesn't have to be expensive, right? You've got old phones, we're using the power of the cloud, like it enables you to actually get to your endpoint quicker.
Which is interesting because talking about traditional filmmakers coming in, especially young filmmakers and storytellers coming in where, you know, on one hand, and I don't know if the answer is good or bad because you get started and it's all about resource filmmaking. You know, what do you have in your bucket to go tell this story? And you have to figure out how to make something compelling within those limitations. But this is really opening up the world completely where it's like those limitations are going away and it's going to be all about who can tell the most compelling story and who can gather the most attention. And that's really democratizing the whole space, especially from the creative side.
Very cool. Now, we've been talking about sunshine and rainbows, but we all know it's not sunshine and rainbows all the time.
Yep.
So, you know, I'm going to direct this one to you, Igor, but feel free, everyone, to chime in. So how do you balance the creative potential of virtual production with some of the technical challenges and limitations that, you know, that we still face today?
Well, I think the way to balance it is be curious. Is be curious and look for things that can creatively impact the end point, which is the audience, in a way that hasn't been done before, in a way that's inclusive, accessible, and I think it's a mindset of doing something that hasn't been done before and just trying different things and see what are the tools, because ultimately what we're talking about is just the tools. I mean, it's a tool for telling a story in a more compelling way that hasn't been done before, right? So it's, for me, it's just like you know, going into a new theater venue. Okay, it's just a venue, and it has its incredible ways to incorporate the audience that other like live theater or film doesn't give me. So it's kind of like a mindset, because I don't want to go into a technical conversation. I'm not you have much better technical people here than I am, but from a perspective of a mindset, it's just like this panel is called. It's a new type of creative. Okay, what's new? What can I do with this that will impact the audience? Ultimately, it's about experiencing something together. Ultimately, it's about being altered in some way or being impacted in some way. And if those tools work, great. If they don't work, no matter how many zeros and ones you have, it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. You know, and I think when it comes to those technical limitations, it's extremely valuable to have partners who can help you figure them out. And actually, I'd love to have you take over this part of the conversation, Connor, because, you know, just this week, we were doing all kinds of crazy things throughout the show floor. Your team was right there lockstep with us on a lot of things. And I'd love for you to talk about, as a, you know, as a innovator, as an actual technology provider, how do you work with customers who, you know, have creative needs and help them solve those problems?
Sure, yeah. Well, we always try to set the expectation that these systems require a period of, you know, not just learning, but really optimizing and inventing, you know, the workflow. So it's not just about plugging in all of the DisplayPort cables and network cables and assigning all the IP addresses and importing your content. It's really about trying to have foresight about, you know, what things might come up during production and giving yourself enough time ahead, you know, before everybody shows up to really kind of put it through its paces and try to this is such a corny, metaphor, but I always imagine these systems are like there are these thickets of like brush, and the little electrons are like these little dwarfs like marching, and they're whacking away, and like the more you kind of run through it, they have these paths that they can go through, and it's like the longer that you can kind of be in the system and operating it and just understanding what things might what levers and dials the creative people might want to pull, the better chance you have of getting out ahead of that and not running into problems on the day of the shoot or the day of the performance.
But like on a technical level, like you iterate for stability, right?
Yeah.
And then you can create on top of that. Like fundamentally, like I think as Connor was saying earlier, outside of the dwarfs and the brush thing, like you've got a lot of
A
signals.
little glimpse inside of my mind.
That's a really interesting insight
They
into
exist.
your brain.
I've met them.
But like you've got a lot of signals that are all coming and that ultimately have to be synchronized output, and then you get that high quality output. Like it's not an out the box thing, right? Like you well know at Vue, like you've got to work on making sure that all the different parts of the pipeline are working to the best of their capability, but then they're all coming together. And like as you say, like when your directors and your producers get on site, there's like it's brilliant, it's amazing, but like there's a lot of background hard work that goes into that. It's just challenging in itself to make sure that the technology sings so that the content can sing even louder.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you a glimpse, I mean, we've been very fortunate to be able to work with some of the, the early people in this industry. So, Lux Machina with Vue, and what they all have in common is they spend a ton of time learning about the technology and the color science and the light and really having that subject matter expertise. That it's not an accident that these companies are the ones that get to do the big projects. It's because they take the time to learn the technology.
Absolutely, and like we're all saying, it's really all to serve the story. It's all to serve the creative people who are day in and day out creating new creative problems that we need to solve. And that's, for me personally, what's the most exciting thing about all of this is we don't even know what the creative challenges of the future are going to be, but I think collectively we're all here to solve them and come up with new and exciting ways to create and experience content that no one may have seen coming. So with that, I would love to open it up to see if there's any questions from the audience. Yes, we have one right away.
Appreciate it. With virtual production, this might be a question for you. When it comes to the bottom of the line crew, your gaffers, your grips, electricians, so forth, what does the future look like for them? How are they adapting to these new technologies when it comes to production? And is there room at the table for other positions that might be needed in the virtual production space?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two parts to it. I think the grips and the gaffers and the below the line teams, they love this because on one hand, this is going to afford them the opportunity to really improve their lifestyle. Like from a production standpoint, long form, short form, this is going to allow them to shoot things like overnights, have the chance to go away in a lot of ways. So that's going to help their lives a lot. And then I think creatively as well, this is allowing them to specialize. I mean, this is just any other tool in the pipeline. I mean, there's constantly innovation going on all facets of the industry. And so in my experience so far, they've loved it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I would add to that, like Corey just said, it is just a tool. There's always going to be on location, always going to be, traditional production methods. However, when you come into the volume, you have your same roles. You have your gaffer, your grip, your art department, but now there's a virtual component to it. And what is really interesting right now, and there's currently, it's changing every day, it's moving quickly, but, now as a gaffer, your lighting also, there's a virtual component to it. So you're working directly with, a environment designer, a virtual gaffer, you could call them, who's, they're lighting the scene. They're placing objects and things, and then you're working directly in tandem with them. And so, yeah, very, very good question, though.
And just one last thing to add to it. What's cool is a lot of this process so far, especially with VFX, has been happening after the fact. And now there's conversations happening and collaborations between crew that weren't talking before. I mean, virtual production supervisors working with gaffers, grips being involved in that. So I think it's also consolidating a lot of the production process and getting people more collaborative within these scenarios.
Any other questions? All right, cool. Well, no more. Love it.
The studio system is really adopting virtual production. Everything from Mandalorian, which is major budget productions. What does the future for the independent filmmaker look like? Is there room at the table? How do they enter into this space for storytelling when they have budget constraints such as like a SAG microfilm or things like that? Is there space for the independent?
Absolutely. I mean, I can answer. I don't know if you want to speak to that as well, Corey.
Yeah, and I'm curious your guys' thoughts too. I mean, we're all coming to it from different sides.
Yeah, like from a technology perspective, of course, like the volume workflow works for a lot of people, but as you say, for the independent, for the sole creator, there are the tools out there, right? Like we have a mobile app for motion capture that is aimed entirely at the independent creator. You have tools like Unreal that are free to the point at which you make over $1 million in terms of monetization. So you've got the options really in terms of what's really, I think, interesting in terms of the market and the way the technology is developed, where you get those high-end productions that everyone here has worked on. They can work in volumes, but also like to the independent level, there's still a hell of a lot of creative you can build based purely on your laptop and the devices you have in your house, which I think is what's really encouraging about the market, is that the tools are available for both ends. And the quality, depending on your creative vision, doesn't have to diminish.
I saw a Mazda ad at the beginning of the pandemic before I'd ever gotten into this, and it was a shot of a car driving down the road, and it panned out, and it was actually a toy car sitting on an iPad with another iPad behind it.
I saw that as well. It's great, isn't it?
But there, for a moment, there was an illusion of realism, and I was just so struck by that because, I mean, yeah, these tools, yes, of course, it's nice to have a massive LED stage or XR stage, but you can do a lot of this stuff with smoke and mirrors and a little bit of
hard work. It's all. That's the thing, is like we all said, right, time and hard work, the creative vision to do it. The tools are available to do that.
And it's going to continue moving that way. Like I think this is the music world brought in artificial intelligence, machine learning, a lot of that earlier on production and in the production process. And I think the same thing's happening here, where right now this is all brand new, but it's really just consolidating the power with all of these tools more into the hands of the filmmaker. And so I think independent-wise, it's going to
definitely. And like the interactivity of those tools, like if you look at like DALL-E, Midjourney, you've got our technology as well. Like I think there will be ultimately the interconnectivity of those tools to then request content. So like as creators, you can go, for ideation terms, give me a person sprinting across the moon, but apply gravity of the moon to it and maybe make a meteor shower. Like that ultimately is and can be possible, but to the degree of quality that you want, I think it will take a little bit of time yet, but you can see the future there already.
Yeah, I would add to all of these amazing points that virtual production is unique in the sense that this scales with budget. So, depending on what you have to work with, if you're Disney and you want to shoot The Mandalorian and you have $100 million, there's a solution for you. If you have $15, there's a solution for you. I actually just saw there's a booth down here. I can point you in the direction, but essentially they offer virtual production on your iPhone for $15 using Unreal Engine in the cloud. So it's insane how this technology scales depending on budget. I'll add, that when it comes to like the physical LED stages and those sorts of things, it scales as well. So you can have something like this, and you can get probably 70 to 80% of the shots that you would need, that you can get out of a large volume as well. So, core to what we believe at View is this technology has to be accessible, and I think that would be the same to everyone here. I mean, with Niles,
it's about democratization, right?
You can use an iPhone for your product.
Exactly. And we always democratization is a very lauded term, but fundamentally it needs to be accessible everywhere to everyone. And to your point, right? Depending on your budget, you can go high end, but depending if you've got less budget, you can still create high quality content. The fact of the matter is that the tools, as you say, are available to creators, and that's hugely important for us as a technology provider.